Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started. So today I wanted to talk about something that I'm sort of having to navigate with Workouts++. That seemed like an interesting discussion to have here, and a topic that is kind of a perennial one that we've talked about many times, around business and pricing and that sort of thing. And so for a little bit of background, so Workouts++ is an app that I released right around this time last year, whose primary purpose is to create a fully customizable workout experience on the Apple Watch, and then on the iPhone to provide a much more detailed analysis and display view of all of the workout data you've ever collected with an Apple Watch, wherever that came from, whether that's in Workouts++ or somewhere else. And it's an app that I made because of a few shortcomings or things that I didn't like about the system app, which is typically where a lot of my ideas come from, where like there's an existing thing that doesn't quite work the way I like, so I wanted to make it better. I wanted to improve it. I had some ideas for how I liked it, and so that's why I started it. And it is an app that I use on a very regular basis, 5 or 6 times a week at least. I use this app, and so it's very tailored to what to the way that I think and the way that I work. And I'm in the process now of finishing a pretty substantial update to it, which will be launching hopefully in about 3 weeks, as you're listening to this, which is kind of bearing down on me, like now that I have like about 2 weeks left of coding to get all the last bugs out. But in about 2 weeks, I'm going to launch a big update for it. And so naturally, you start to think about, what are you going to do with this new update? Are you going to make any changes? It's a good opportunity to kind of reflect on how the app has done and where it might go in the future. So in the initial version, the version that I launched last December, the app was paid. It was a $5 app, and my reasoning for that initially was coming from a place that it is a very focused sort of power user niche kind of a thing. Like you have to have an Apple Watch for it to be useful, period. So that's reducing my potential audience to down quite dramatically. I think for my analytics, for health conscious people, right around maybe 10% of them have an Apple Watch. So of iPhone users, I mean. So that's pretty small, and then you need to want more than you get out of the built-in app. So it seemed like, well, there's not that many people who might use this. So like maybe I'll make it paid. Like maybe I'll sort of take that approach. And also it seemed like it's fairly premium in the sense of it was it's trying to do more. It's allowing you, if you really care about this kind of stuff, you can tweak and adjust and do a lot of things. And so I was like, let's try that. And the short version is that it didn't do very well at all. I'm about to get into exactly how poorly it did. Before I do that, I always want to just sort of disclaimer things that anytime you hear people talk about like sales numbers or things like that, it's always good to take with a grain of salt that the two types of numbers you tend to hear are when things go very poorly, or when things go unusually and exceptionally good. So just something to keep in mind that results not typical. Like it's just it's just instructive insofar as helping sort of couch where I'm going to go with this next. But in the first year of the app's life, the app made $16,000, which is not nothing to sneeze at. Is a good run for an iOS app in many ways. But as you would expect, it probably made 50% of that in the first month, and has settled down dramatically since then. To at this point, it's not uncommon to have a day where it's like 0 or 1 sales is starting to become pretty common. And I think that's a pattern that is very common with a paid app and just with apps in general in the App Store, that there's this pattern where you might get a little bit of interest up front and then it just falls off. And this app in particular, like it's competing against such a wide variety of things that in retrospect, it's probably not unexpected that it's very hard to justify that someone would, pay a substantial, or at least a substantial in the App Store sense, amount of money for it. And so from that perspective, I kind of view it financially as a bit of a flop now. It's not something that I think is financially very, very viable at that point. And if anything, it's kind of silly that I continue to work on it, except for the fact that I use it every single day, and I really like it, and I have the benefit, I suppose, of by virtue of being self-employed and being able to make these kind of choices that don't necessarily make sense financially. I can just keep working on it because I like it, because I enjoy it, and I can support myself with my other apps. But that brings me to version 2, where I think I've been toying with a variety of things. It seemed obvious that I should definitely make the app free in some ways, because I think that's just the app store where we find ourselves now. That like the paid apps are become you have to be doing something else, I think, for that to be a viable situation. Like almost all of the app store is free with something else. But when I made that decision, then it's like you start to get into, okay, should I have ads? Should I have some kind of in-app purchase or subscription situation? And the more I thought about it for this app, the more I kind of decided that maybe this would be an interesting opportunity to, rather than go down the road of trying to work out some method to extract, money from these customers, who are these potential customers, even like the user base is incredibly small now, and any amount I get from them is still going to be somewhat immaterial, unless I was able to grow the audience. So, and anytime any of those scenarios that I came up with, like putting ads into it, it doesn't really work, because ads tend to work well in apps that you will go to on a regular basis, like several times a day, that become a more habitual app. Whereas an app like this is the thing that you might open maybe once a day at best, probably more likely once a week on the iPhone side, just because that's the nature of, how often do you really need to do like deep dives into your past workout history? And I also just kind of thought like, I don't really like the feeling of ads in general. Like I know they're an absolutely necessary situation, but they weren't my favorite. And then so it's like, okay, so I do some kind of subscription, some kind of in-app purchase, some kind of situation where like, well, you get the first X, you can see the last week's worth of data, but you can't see more unless you pay. And you're putting up a lot of barriers and pain points in my app. And I decided that I think what I'm going to try instead is to kind of view the situation I have, that by virtue of having diversified extensively in the past, that I am now in a position where I can view my existing business, that all my other apps, as a venture capitalist who is able to finance the development of apps that can just go out and see how big of an audience they can garner, and worry less about the immediate return and outcome and squeezing every penny out of the app in the near term as I can. And so I think I'm just going to make the app totally free. No in-app purchases, no ads, no barriers or pain points, nothing to try and create like a point of hesitation, that if someone is potentially interested in this, they can go and get it and try the full experience. And like the only kind of vague monetization-y kind of thing I'm going to do is have links to my other apps, which are related and potentially interesting to that person in the app, just as that seems like a reasonable best practice kind of a thing, but not even really expecting to make much from that. But anyway, like it's kind of this interesting model, because I've never launched an app that had sort of an app like this where I have no immediate like financial benefit. It's entirely a goal or a play of seeing how big of an interest I could get in this app, if I take away all the potential limiters, all the potential things that might get in the way of its growth, and then just see. And like, in a weird way, there's a very small chance that it goes anywhere. There's still the most likely scenario is that even completely free, no barriers, no one downloads it or uses it in the long term. But I can potentially, rather than having a very high chance of having a very good chance of having a very small audience, I have a very small chance of having a potentially big audience. So I don't know. Is that crazy?
Probably not. It's hard to think about. Like it's hard for people like us who don't usually do future bets on growth and thinking like maybe we'll make money on this someday in the future. Like that's not something that we as indie iOS developers usually do. And that is how a large part of the industry works. So it's probably worth considering that. As you kind of mentioned, you kind of said it was like analogous to a VC kind of model. with the disclaimer that neither of us are venture capitalists, I think that's not a bad idea. It's not a bad metaphor. In the VC world, they know if you just have a big audience, and more importantly, if you have growth that seems to be consistent or accelerating, there will be a way for that to be valuable. Like, even if it isn't immediately apparent, even if you defer that value until later, and sometimes, in many cases, getting that growth is so important and so valuable that they intentionally defer any kind of monetization just to leave the doors as wide open as possible for people to come in. And then they figure, later down the road, this can be worth something to somebody, whether it's direct or whether it's then being sold to someone else, and then they figure out how to monetize it, or if it never needs to be directly monetized at all. There's lots of situations where something has value to the people who make it or who fund it, even if it never collects direct revenue. There's all sorts of side benefits things can have, or strategic benefits to some bigger picture. That's not a bad idea, and it's also not a bad idea to say, I don't even know what the outcome could be, but since it's already you've already made some money off of it, and that money has already dried up basically. So it's like on some level, it's like, well, what are your options here? You ran through the challenges of, this particular app, Workouts Plus Plus. Like, there's not a lot of places it can be easily monetized in ways that are likely to succeed, because it is, mostly used on the watch. It's hardly ever launched on the phone. That's just going to be really, really hard to monetize it in a meaningful way. So I think you're kind of in a corner here that I don't really think you have a lot of other options, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it would be kind of freeing to just let go of the idea of direct monetization with this app and just see what happens. I mean, you have enough apps and enough experience out there that the kinds of user numbers that you can get when something has no boundaries, like when it's totally free, or when it's free with an app purchase. Like, you've seen those numbers, and you've seen what it gets when it's paid up front too. And I think you have enough experience and data to be able to make that kind of decision.
Yeah, and I think something that it's a weird thing to say, but I feel like the thing that makes me want to do this most is that I've never done it before. And something that I have found time and time again, like in the many, many years, almost 9 years of being an iOS developer, is that the things that I've like learned from the most, or expanded my business the most, have tended to be the things and the times when I'm doing something new, where I'm doing something that I haven't tried before. Because otherwise, I imagine, like, the problem I so often will fall into, I think, is that I am doing things the same way that I've done them before. And sometimes that's good. Like, there's a good lesson to be learned, or there's a best practice that you can pull from something. But very often, I think that I get stuck on, like, well, I did this way before, so let me do it that way again. And that is probably in the long term, like the death of my business. Like, that if I keep trying to just do the same thing in the same way, even if it can be effective in the short term, like, I kind of get nervous. And in this funny way, like, as soon as I had this idea, then I was like sitting there, I was like, what if I just make it totally free? And not, even though, like, the fact that, like, in many ways that is, like, foolish, like I'm giving up there's a definite downside in a financial cost. Like, I have a reasonable expectation that, like, if I, have a big update, and I, get a little press and do my little things, that I would have a nice couple of weeks of income. But it's the understanding that, like, maybe it's better to not worry about that. And because I've never had that perspective, like, even that's exciting and interesting to me in a funny way. And I think it reminds me of the importance of not being complacent with anything, like, to just always be looking for opportunities to try. And, like, in this case, like, it's a good thing to try because it's not doing anything for me now. Like, I have this thing that maybe has a potential upside or potential interest somewhere down the road, that's never going to be realized in its current state. So let's try it and see. And, maybe there'll be a podcast in a couple of weeks or a couple of months where I'm like, that was a terrible idea. And then I can change course or decide what I want to do at that point. But it's in a weird way. It's almost like whenever I encounter a place that's like, I've never done that before, that makes me like doubly and perhaps slightly irrationally interested in trying it. Just so that I can add that data point, into my collection of other data points and kind of be able to make a better decision for whatever my next app is, whatever that may be.
Well, and there's other value here too. Like, in direct value, like, you're getting these users, and, you mentioned earlier that some of them will buy your other app. So that's some value right there. You're going to get a certain number of people in from any kind of press you get. More of them will stick around because there's no barriers to them sticking around. So then you'll have even more people looking at your other apps. You'll have some spillover press where people who see the press will look at your other apps. So there's all direct benefits there. Also, you are now talking about it on a podcast episode. You're probably going to talk about it again on at least one more podcast episode. We get paid to do these podcast episodes. So you're generating, good topics for content for the things you do, for other ways you get paid. And then if new listeners come in because they wanted to hear how that turned out, maybe you write a blog post about it, right? And so then, and you don't have ads on your site, but then those people might come to the podcast where we have ads, which I'm about to do in a minute, and they might stick around. So then not only did you get paid for that episode where we talked about this, but then if they stick around, we can raise our rates down the road. And then that person has delivered you value down the road of increased money per podcast episode. So like, there's a lot of like network effect here that builds over time. Also, next time you have a new app to launch, you have a place you can promote that where there's more people listening. Both the podcast will have more listeners, and then you can even do an in-app promotion in Workouts Plus Plus, which has this now massive free audience, and then you can sell another app. So like there is a lot of network benefit here to you. Even if that one app itself does not directly make the money, it can cause this network effect to happen. I know this is not the correct use of network effect. It can cause these side effects to happen that themselves can bring you value.
Yeah, and I think what's liberating in a weird way about that is I think it's so easy to, and maybe certainly it's different. I appreciate that I'm in a privileged position to have other apps and other means of support that allow me to do things like this. Like, it's probably fair to say, just like, yep, I totally get that the privileged position that is. That if this was my first app, this would probably not be a great idea. But because it isn't, because I do have this opportunity, like, it's interesting to, yeah, it's like, as you're saying, like, there's all of these other things these other potential avenues for benefit that I typically close myself off to because I get too short-sighted. And in a weird way, like, I mean, it's so easy, I think, for myself, and I mean, generally, I would say, like, the sort of the more indie development community to kind of look down our noses at the more, like, MBA businessy folks who probably honestly have a better understanding of all those kind of auxiliary benefits that you were just talking about, like all of these other effects and things that maybe they quantify, maybe they don't, but they have a better understanding of the fact that it's like, don't worry, just worrying about the income I'm going to get from an app in the near term is almost certainly not taking into account the full picture or the full understanding of like what possibly could be coming down the road. And so as like independent developers, we might be shooting ourselves in the foot as a result because we're so focused on this or on like what's going to happen now. And maybe when you're starting out and you're trying to launch your first app, like that initial burst of income and having a sustainable living and paying for medical insurance and like all of that, yeah, it's like, it's much more important. But understanding that that's not the only way to live is probably, it's like, it's definitely better to have that kind of, a bigger breadth of perspective and maybe try and learn from another world. Like I like, consciously and unconsciously, I like look down on VC apps in a weird way. Like and that kind of, any time I find myself being kind of, elitist or biased or whatever you like, sort of having a prejudice against something like that, like that's probably not a good thing, right? Like that's in general in life, like being prejudiced just sort of without basis is not good. So maybe it's like it's good to stretch ourselves. Good to think about these kind of things and try and learn from the result.
We are sponsored this week by Linode. Linode has fast, powerful web hosting options that you can get set up in just seconds. Linode's tools are very easy to use and understand. They let you choose your resources and Linux distro, giving you the power and flexibility you need. And Linode plans start at just $5 a month. That gives you a Linux server with 1 gig of RAM in the Linode cloud. Whether you're just getting started with your first server or deploying a complex system like what me and David run, Linode is the right choice for you. They offer the fastest hardware and network with fantastic customer support behind it all. It has never been easier to launch a Linode cloud server, and Linode guarantees 99.9% uptime for server availability. Once your server is up, they keep it that way. Linode is great for tasks like hosting large databases, running mail servers, running private Git servers, operating powerful applications, and so much more. And Linode has fantastic pricing options available. As I mentioned, you can get a server with 1 gig of RAM for just $5 a month. Man, I remember when web hosting used to actually be expensive. This is amazing. And you can scale up. They have like 16 gigs of RAM for just $60 a month. Lots of plans in between. And across the board, this is twice the amount of RAM that you'll get elsewhere. As a listener of this show, if you sign up at linode.com/radar, you will be supporting us, and you will get $20 towards any Linode plan. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's nothing to lose. So go to linode.com/radar to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of that $20 credit, or use promo code RADAR2017 at checkout. Thank you so much to Linode for supporting this show. So I wanted to talk a little bit about an example I have from this world that I'm developing is my podcast MP3 encoder called Forecast. I've gone through similar thoughts as you with like what I should do with monetizing this, and this is a specialized tool. It's a Mac podcast MP3 encoder that lets you make chapters and stuff in them, and so this is going to have a very small audience. I think I'd be lucky to have hundreds of people using it. Certainly not more than that. And if you do some quick math, like how much do you have to charge money to make meaningful money when your customer base is that small? Like I did, quick math. Suppose I charge $50 for the app, which is I think decent for like a good Mac utility. So suppose it's $50. If I get 500 customers, which is way higher than I think I will get, especially if it costs $50, that's $25,000 gross. After taxes, that's more like $15,000, thanks New York. And so, it's like I'm going to have to build up the infrastructure and provide the level of support that people would expect from a $50 app to only make at most maybe $15,000 over the lifetime of this app. Like that's a balance that like what you have to put in place to support a $50 app properly, like to what customers would expect for that. It's not worth that to me to make that amount of money. Like I would want to be making more money if I was going to set that up at all. And if it's $50, like I think 500 customers is actually pretty optimistic. I think a way more likely number is 100 customers, in which case I'm making $3,000, which I can buy a MacBook Pro, but that's about it. I can buy most of a MacBook Pro, but this is not. We're not talking major money here, and so it wouldn't be worth the overhead to me of having to support having it be a paid app. So I started looking at what are the other benefits of this app existing? I mean, and one of them, and you mentioned you use Workouts++, you like it, and so I use Forecast. A lot of my podcaster friends use it. Soon, once I release it, other people will be able to use it too, and it benefits us all simply by existing. Like the fact just that I wrote it, that is a benefit to me because it saves me time every week and lets me make podcasts better. And the podcasts make money. So even if I never make a dime from it, and even if I never even distribute it to anybody else, it already has been worth the time I put into making it just for the value it provides to me. And then also there's things like political goals. I believe that it would benefit podcasting as a whole if more people used tools like this. And I can advance certain goals I have. I think MP3 is the best format for distributing podcasts right now, not AAC. And if people currently want to use chapters, they often use AAC. And so I think MP3 is better for that. So I can put out this tool to kind of advance that agenda. And I have this other app, Overcast, which has, that does make money. And there are ways that a podcast encoder could benefit Overcast. So, for instance, Overcast will always support every forecast feature. Like, if I can make sure that like the way I do chapters and forecast will work in Overcast because I'm writing both sides. It's using the same library on both ends. I can make sure that always works properly. I can also build new features into Overcast that require some kind of metadata on the encoding side, and then I can add that to Forecast, and I can have this, this at least the podcasts who use it, they can then use these features that I can integrate into Overcast. And so, like, there are options I have there, and there are lots of alternative business models I can use besides paid up front. Obviously, there's like trials and Nagware and stuff like that. I don't really want to do that. There is one thing though that could be a direct benefit here is that Forecast is used by podcast producers. I need to reach podcast listeners for Overcast. I need podcast producers to promote Overcast. So yeah. I could make it just like the deal is if you use Forecast, you need to either by some kind of like goodwill policy or by like forcibly embedding a promo unless you pay or something like that. I could require users of Forecast to promote Overcast in their shows. That's a little gross. I don't like having it be a hard requirement, but I could just put like a little piece of text somewhere saying, hey, please promote Overcast periodically in your shows if you like this. And that, not everybody would do that. Probably a very low percentage of the users would do it, but if any of them do it, that's still a benefit. So there are lots of ways that I can look at this, and like it's very clear to me that I do not want this to be a paid upfront app because it wouldn't bring in enough money to be worth the hassle and the support costs. But there's lots of other things I can do that the more people use it, the better these effects get. So it probably should be free.
Yeah, and I think as you're unpacking that, what I see is it's exactly the same sort of situation that you were outlining for what I'm finding myself with, where it's these auxiliary effects or network effects or whatever these vague, kind of slightly amorphous but definite benefits that just having it out there as broadly as possible, because taking advantage of the fact that it doesn't like cost us, we're not producing a physical object that it costs us money to produce, like an extra copy. It's just, we can just put it out there and it's as many people as use it as possible. Like there's no ongoing cost to us that sort of almost necessarily accrues all these other little side benefits that are wonderful. And especially because it's like, it's not totally orthogonal to like your main business. Like if it were like you wrote this Mac, you wrote a to-do list manager for the Mac. Like, okay, that's a bit more complicated to have these beneficial overlaps. But like even just the fact of like podcast producers knowing about Overcast is a great thing. If keeping in mind that the people who buy the ads that are shown in Overcast are podcast producers currently, right?
Right, exactly.
Like just making them aware of Overcast and having it be a marketing tool, like in a weird way, it's like whatever potential cost you are giving up, whatever that few $1,000s is, and not trying to get money from it. It's like just viewing it as a strict marketing expense. Like the Forecast is a elaborate advertisement for Overcast that is targeted at a very specific demographic, but turns out to be the demographic that you are trying to reach to buy ads in your app. Like it is such an interesting thing when you stop, all these little benefits that can appear when you don't worry about the short-term benefit of it. Like all these down the road, like just, it's hard to quantify, it's hard to know, but I'm almost certainly the more people who know about Overcast, that's better than not. So like, yeah, making it free and just having the goal of it being, that as high a number of podcast producers as possible are using it, that's awesome. And especially because like I know which of the podcasts that I listen to are using Forecast because they have great, they have great chapters and the way the chapters work, like it all works seamlessly in Overcast. And so that makes Overcast look good. Like the more people who do that, the better it would be. So it's like, it seems like it's a win-win everywhere.
Exactly. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We're out of time this week. Make sure that you download Workouts++, buy it while it's still paid, and then buy all David's other apps, and then make sure you use Forecast whenever you release it. In the meantime, please use Overcast, and please patronize our fine sponsors on this show. Thanks for listening, everybody. Please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.